Welcome. I'm Judith Royal. I'm an archetypal astrologer, and I'm inviting you to join me for the next about 15 minutes to look up, to be inspired, as I always am, and I think you are too, when we watch the moon or the stars at night, that there is a power greater than myself. And in the beauty of the rhythmic melody, as the planets orbit, as the moon twirls and dances around us, and that we can download that peace, that sureness in the order of the universe, and bring that into the chaos, the apparent chaos in this world. That there is constancy in change. And then we get the universe showing us what we already know and say often, which is history just repeats itself. Or another line is, there's nothing new under the sun. Well, it is true that rhythmically things do repeat. And right now that's especially poignant because the big picture on the eclipse, May 26th, a gateway opened in which intuitively I felt the power of intention and prayer to be able to bend the light towards us, towards myself, so that I could see not just with my body's eyes, but with the vision of that's possible when we're looking in the spiritual light of love. For me, that often means that I can see the synchronicities. They appear like miracles on my path, things that just sort of pop up. I'm sure you have the same experiences. But in this case, there was a 100-year anniversary associated with this eclipse, and that is that on May 29th of 1919, the moon slid in front of the sun in the same way that it did for us during this eclipse. But in 1919, it forever altered our understanding of space-time. It was called Einstein's eclipse because physicists and scientists had been trying to prove and or disprove Einstein's prediction that the sun's gravity could bend starlight. Now, that was very hard to see except during an eclipse like the one we just had, when it's exact. The moon is also at perigee, closest in her orbit to the Earth. So it's magnified in many kinds of ways. But nevertheless, with the moon occluding the sun from our viewpoint on Earth, it was possible to look at the aura of the sun and look at many of the scientific properties that ordinarily physicists were not able to observe. And of course, they were able to prove and agree that Einstein was right. And what a concept, the bending of starlight. And so how could I possibly question the spiritual truth that with my thoughts, with my mind attuned to vision, I can pull and the heavens' lights would bend towards me to comfort me and help me in a time of distress or any time, the same as it does with you. 2021 is the 100th anniversary of Einstein receiving the Nobel Prize for this theory. Now, synchronicities recently have also shown us other 100-year anniversaries that on the surface are not uplifting like Einstein's, but in fact are a little bit of cold water in our face. They are wake-up calls. So, for example, Memorial Weekend, we're looking at the 100-year anniversary of the Tulsa Massacre. And this at a time and on the anniversary of the murder of George Floyd. And also Memorial Weekend, the time of the murder of so many of our people in wars of all kinds. Now I want to add a cautionary tale, because on June 14th, well, that's the peak. It's a long transit, so not just on that day, but we have the second of three squares between the planet Saturn, who's now in Aquarius, and I'm calling him scientific Saturn, and with a square to, that's an internal tension, with the god of lightning Uranus, who's now in the earth sign of Taurus. So that's air and earth. They're not compatible elements. And it is the two sort of like chalk on the blackboard screeching between an eccentric form of obstinacy that Saturn often inspires. That's the wrong word, but anyway, because Saturn loves to preserve the status quo. And in a 10th square, that comes out as opposition to innovation, opposing change, because of sort of a rigid adherence to the past, giving us some inflexibility about rules and law, kind of dictatorial and an autocratic form of egoism. Let me put it that way. Now that attitude is in tension with the god of lightning, who is the energy of rebellion, the revolution, but in a 10th square, that's not a happy association, because here he will just be inconsistent, sort of contradicting the norms, and rattling the chains on our very long cherished but quite definitely outworn beliefs. The first challenge of this energy came February 17th. And so this one is June 14th is the retrograde phase, which is much more calling us to resolve this inside ourselves and our own lives. And we will have the final curtain for it, December 23rd. Now, what is the solution for this? It's also in the arena of not trusting yourself as an eyewitness, but rather joining with our brothers and sisters in fellowship, in brotherhood and sisterhood, in which ideas are shared. The Aquarius energy that we began in December 2020 is very much humanitarian interests. And isn't it true? The underbelly of what COVID taught us is that we are not an island unto ourselves, right? We are all connected to one another. Most definitely proving what Martin Luther King and, many brilliant men and women before have said, which is, what affects one of us affects all of us. The physicists have even now proven that, right? So think of it this way. This square hits me right dead center of one of my worst character traits, which is I just love to be right. And so when I was talking about Saturn's opposing innovation by a rigid adherence to the past, well, after all, when I think I'm right, it's always some form of what I've learned in the past. And I'm still clinging to it. And often I'm doing that in spite of the fact that there's plenty of evidence to the contrary. So, what is to be done? And here comes the very wonderful news I get to tell you this time. Did you notice your luck changed? It did for all of us. It shifted around May 13th and will be with us for 11 weeks until July 28th. We have this respite in which the planet Jupiter moved into the sign of Pisces. Pisces, compassion, empathy, and depth. Jupiter would inspire us with the optimism to know that hope is the new contagion. It's true, of course, that millions of bodies are still suffering and dying from COVID-19, India being one of the most tragic recent examples, 4,000 people dying in a day. But we must remember that, in fact, the shift has happened, and we are on the way to being on the other side of that disease. And so hope is contagious now. Spread it around. It's as contagious as love. And so what is our work in this is to, with all of our vigilance, watch what we think. And when we think a thought of fear, we remember that that is false evidence appearing real. It is in fact an illusion. And in that moment, we see that's true. We actively shift our thinking to love. In fact, as you know, the world was sort of a walking cry for help, for love. And every one of us, what do we all share in the hope front with Jupiter is that we all want to be happy. We all want to be healthy and free and abundant. Think about how the ego uses sickness to try to prove to us that we are separate, we are cut off from other people, because sickness is really a form of isolation. It seems to keep one part of ourself from all the rest of us, to suffer something that others perhaps don't feel. It's as if it tries to give the body a power and to make the idea of separation real. But we've had enough of living in a solitary prison, split apart and held in different pieces by some solid wall. It appears to be a solid wall of flesh, the body. But now we have with Jupiter the uprising of hope, because Jupiter inspires optimism and Jupiter inspires positive thought. So that's not a violent rebellion, far from it, right? It's just challenging, also our eyewitness knowing that's unreliable, and challenging the belief system we have, the ancient one, that makes it appear to be true, that something that affects me does not affect you, and vice versa. In this 11 weeks, Jupiter in Pisces is going to bring us a heightened awareness of the guide that we have chosen. In fact, If I look, for example, at my challenge, loving to be right, etc., then I have to remember that my own mind can be a very bad neighborhood, and I should never go there alone. So I need a guide, and it is absolutely the guide that I choose, whether it's ego or spirit. There are no other choices. My guides are either fear or love. There are no other choices. And if I choose a different guide than the one that counsels fear, than the one that wants to prove to me that I am separate from you in any way, if I choose the spirit of love as my guide, the first thing that has to fall away is judgment. The truth that I see through the eyes of love is that I cannot judge. I mean, think of it. Every opinion, every judgment that I hold is from my own eyewitness, is from this very tiny partial bit of evidence. And that's not judgment, that's an opinion formed in ignorance. So let me leave you with this image. Join me in imagining this, that we are like a field of sunflowers as far as the eye can see, all of us with our heads raised towards the noonday sun, and that we have been planted in this beautiful field by a very kind farmer who has taken care of the soil, who has watered and nurtured us all of our lives. And all we have ever needed to do was to look toward the light and bloom. So thanks for listening, and bye for now. You can always reach me at judith@judithroyal.com.